Hi all, it's Marc de Bruin again. Today I'd like to have a quick ramble, just make sure my video's going. Yeah, it's going. A quick ramble about a topic that's been discussed quite often recently with clients of mine, and it's very close to my heart as well, both experientially and as a counsellor, and it's anxiety and more in detail, more specifically panic attacks. I've done videos on that before, I've written articles on it, but a thing that comes up or has come up quite often recently and has come up in the past as well is what to do with them. I've done videos on that before. What I want to discuss today a little bit more specifically is the whole idea behind what are they anyway, and are they bad? Is something wrong? And should I stop them? Should I get rid of them? Or I want to get rid of them? Those types of questions. Not sure how long this video will go for. I will try to make it not too long, but I definitely want to give you a little bit of insight in how panic attacks actually work and why they are, at least in my professional opinion, not such a bad thing. It's just we make a bad thing out of them. If you look at our brain, I'm not going to go too deeply into that, but there are sort of three parts to it. There's probably more depending on what school of thought you hang on to. But the three parts that I recognize and often discuss are the brainstem, which takes care of your blood pressure, your body temperature, your breathing, etc., your eye blinking, I think, as well. That's completely outside of our control to a very high degree. We can't do much with that. It just does its thing, and that's great. The second part, the second brain part that we have, we share with reptilians, for instance, and that's often called the reptilian brain. It's what we share with crocodiles and other creepy creatures. It's an evolutionarily slightly younger version of the brain, but still fairly old. So it responds through some older software, let's call it that way. The wires are slightly different than the modern side, and it's there to keep us alive. In simple terms, and that's how I often explain it to the client, I call it your security guard. It's there to keep you alive, it's there to warn you for danger, it's there to avoid bad things happening from you, but it's also there to help you feel better. So it'll try everything for you to be better, to have a better life, to be more comfortable, and to avoid anything that's dangerous or risky. So in general, it tries to avoid what needs to be avoided that could be not good for you, and it tries to go for stuff that it thinks could be good for you, or actually is determined to be better. So it's that whole fight, flight, freeze or faint part of our brain that we desperately need. So otherwise you would run under a truck, or look at a crocodile and go like, oh, that's cute, about 2 seconds before you get eaten. We wouldn't recognize it to be dangerous. So we need that part of our brain. The third part is what makes us different from most other animals on the planet is the neocortex. It's the new cortex. It's the new lining. It's the younger part of our brain, or the youngest part anyway. And that's the part that we use for thinking, for decision making, for focusing, for concentrating, for pros and cons analysis, for weighing up benefits and drawbacks, and for sort of logical reasoning as well. Now those three parts, but especially the neocortex and the more reptilian limbic brain, they work together, trying to keep us alive, but also making us go for things that are reasonably good for us because we thought about them and they do make us feel better. And our neocortex and limbic brain agree on that fact. So that gives you a bit of an idea. There's way more subtlety to it, obviously, than this, but it gives you an idea about how our brain is built up. The neocortex I call generally inclined, such as our CEO. It's the CEO of our company. It decides what's going to happen in the future. Should we innovate? Are we on a right profit course? Are we going all right as a business? And a security guard does his or her thing in the background, making sure that everyone stays safe. So that's the biology. I'll explain really simply. Now, when it comes to panic attacks, they are generally driven by that more primitive reptilian part of our brain. Put simply, the information that comes in through our senses, our eyes, our ears, our nose, our mouth, and our fingers, and other sensory parts to our body have a shorter connection to that reptilian brain, just evolutionarily speaking, than to the neocortex that sits behind your skull here. So when danger erupts, or when danger is perceived, the information first goes to the security guard before it gets relayed to the CEO. That's where, again, very simply, there's more to it, but that's where panic attacks can come from. Based on your belief systems, the way you were raised, the way your body is wired, the way you've been taught, what you have been experiencing to be dangerous or risky, that will all get analysed, through what comes in through your senses, or the information will get analysed based on all those beliefs, and then your security guard will make a decision whether that's something to be avoided or something to actually go for, because it could make life more comfortable. So generally when a threat erupts, when something happens that causes us, people, anxiety, it's because the security guard in our brain has determined that something is of threat and therefore should elicit a response. And then you get the HPA axis, and there's all sorts of stuff in the sympathetic nervous system. I'll spare you all the boring details. Do that in another video if you're interested. But it gets our body in that fight-flight mechanism where adrenaline gets released, where cortisol gets released, and we get ready to either run, fight, or do anything to maintain our survival. That in itself is the exact same thing in a panic attack. A panic attack is nothing more, also nothing less, than our brain, most likely the reptilian part of our brain, realizing that there is a potential threat, and it mobilizes our body to get ready to either run away or fight this thing. It's the same like a crocodile would do if it faces a bigger crocodile, or if another threat is present. So that in itself, a panic attack in itself, is normal. If you are faced with something that you perceive to be dangerous and risky, then you reacting to that through a panic attack or through strong anxiety, mild or severe, is a really normal reaction. It's what's supposed to happen. It's actually our body mobilizing us to fight or flee or do something else. So panic attacks in general, anxiety attacks, even though they feel absolutely crap, because they do, are not dangerous. They're actually quite normal. It means that you are responding normally to an abnormal situation. Where we think that it goes wrong is that we don't have control over this, and that it's going to last forever, and that it's going to affect our lives for forever until the end of days. And that's not true. First of all, there's a biological mechanism that will not allow us to experience panic attacks for longer than a certain amount of time, unless we keep cranking the engine by adding anxiety upon anxiety. But normally, our bodies will not allow ourselves to rev at really high revs like a car engine for too long, because that could be potentially dangerous. So automatically there will be a biological response that actually makes us go back to rest and digest, to calm, and it's the parasympathetic nervous system that will kick in at some stage. So there's a biological factor that controls or moderates that anyway, and that you can rely on. On the other hand, what we often do is not only having the panic attack based on what we're perceiving to be a risk, but then starting to add all sorts of worries and troubles and thinking on top of that panic attack that actually creates anxiety about anxiety. So we start to become afraid of having these panic attacks and become afraid of our own anxiety. So then the symptoms increase, we become more worried, we have a stronger reaction because now we fear that we might have another one in the future, and guess what? That's what our brains sort of listen to, and often that then happens. And therefore we'll stack up a whole bunch of emotions on top of each other and feel absolutely horrible and thinking we're totally out of control. That's not the case. So one thing to realize is that there is a biological mechanism that will ultimately, if you just let it do its thing, control or moderate that anxiety response back to normal. No one stays in a panic attack forever. It's not inherently dangerous. But we can make our lives really difficult by becoming anxious about being anxious. So adding another layer on top of the sandwich. So now we've got to deal with two sets of emotions. It's the initial anxiety here, and then the anxiety about the anxiety on top of that one. Now, this little video will not be about what to do next, although a little bit I'll give you one or two tips. But it's more about realizing that it's actually normal to have anxiety attacks. It's a normal reaction by normal people to an abnormal situation. And if you would just let it do its thing, it would at some point just fade away all by itself once the threat has gone. It's just what happens. It's generally that we hang on to stuff that makes it harder for us. What we can do, now let me put it this way. What I often get as a question from clients is like, how can I stop that? How can I get rid of that? And I sort of put a friendly, respectful and loving smirk in their direction and go like, well, you can't give it up. Because that part of your brain that sits between your ears, behind your eyes, is actually an essential part of your survival mechanism. So to not want to have that work, to want to get rid of that part of your brain, forget it. It's not going to work. And it's actually quite dangerous, because if you wouldn't perceive danger anymore, perceive threat, or wouldn't be able to assess what's better for you and what's worse for you, then you probably wouldn't lead a very effective life. So getting rid of it or stopping it is something you don't actually want to have as a goal, because first of all, it's impossible, and second of all, it's highly ineffective. It's not smart. What can you do? And that's what I was discussing with a client yesterday as well. And I'll try and do it with my hands. If this is the intensity of the anxiety attack, and this is the length of the anxiety attack, now we can lengthen it up, actually going outside my little screen here, or we can shorten it to a very high degree. And what we can do is moderate the intensity of it, or keep it as high as we want to kick it, by just keep cranking the engine and getting more anxious and more anxious and more anxious. So where our control or management can come in is to actually look at, say, okay, anxiety is normal, so don't resist that in itself. Don't resist that happening, because that's futile and it's actually going against your normal biology. But what we can work on is making sure that by not keep cranking the engine, don't do that, we can lessen the effect of the anxiety attack and make it relatively short. So instead of a half an hour thing, it could become a 5 or 10 minute thing before your body starts to come down. And on top of that, instead of a 95% anxious response, by us doing some, for instance, mindfulness training that I can easily teach you, or other ways of monitoring and managing the anxiety, we can bring the intensity level down from, say, a 95% to a 25, a 30, or 40%. Obviously, those averages or those numbers are completely random, but we can bring it down significantly and make that whole experience less threatening. So what can you do? Well, loads. Like I said, mindfulness is a really good way to start becoming okay with not being okay. Anxiety is not being okay. If you can become okay with that, that sounds paradoxical, but it works, then really there's no big deal. You're facing a threat. It's normal to be upset about that. Just go with that. Just feel it. And there's techniques to do that, which I'll probably share in another video, or we can talk about in person. That's one thing. And on the other side, make sure to level off that intensity, and that can be done, for instance, by breathing. I know I've done a video on the 5-1-5 breathing pattern. Maybe look that up on my website. But it's that 5 second in, 1 second hold, 5 second out breathing cycle that actually starts to have an effect on your vagus nerve, which hopefully, but generally, kickstarts your parasympathetic nervous system at least a lot quicker than it normally would. So by controlling our breathing, by becoming very conscious of that and controlling that, on top of accepting the fact that we are not feeling great, and that is okay, it's okay not to be okay, to then add that 5-1-5 breathing on top, we can definitely start lowering the intensity of whatever you're experiencing, lessening the length of it, lessening the duration of it. And beyond that, once we are okay with not being okay and not adding that sandwich on top anymore, then we can actually start looking at, okay, what's possible here? Can I work on becoming slightly less reactive? And acceptance and commitment therapy and solution-focused therapy and cognitive behavioral therapy can be really helpful with that. And some spiritual approaches about, what is life actually about, can help with that too. That's then the order of the day, but not before we have taken care of this layer, which is actually what upsets most people. It's the thought of becoming anxious that creates an anxiety on top of the actual anxiety, which freaks people out. So in summary, anxiety is normal. It's a normal reaction by normal people to abnormal situations. You want to have it because it actually keeps you alive. You want to have that capacity in order to get an anxiety attack, and then to make a decision what to do next. You don't want to have too much of it, so the duration and the intensity you want to make sure you can manage, and there's loads of stuff that we can do about that. But stop wanting to get rid of it, or stop wanting to stop it, because that's an impossible task. You would try and kill off one of your brain parts. You don't want to do that, other than with grave consequences. But it's actually not necessary. There's plenty of other ways that we can manage and work with the anxiety when it comes up, without it being such a threatening thing or such a thing to be avoided. So as long as that makes sense, we got something to work with. So this is more a framework video, if you will. It's not a massive tip and do this kind of video. It's more an idea of, anxiety is normal. We can work with it. So let's work on normalizing what is a normal part of our neurological functioning, our biological functioning, but let's keep working on making it acceptable in intensity and acceptable in length, and that's definitely something that's possible. Hope that made sense. If not, you know where to find me. It's Marc, M-A-R-C, at simplifyinglife.com.au, Marc, M-A-R-C, at simplifyinglife.com.au. Otherwise, just type my name in on Facebook or Google and you'll find me somewhere. Look forward to speaking with you next time, and I hope this was helpful. Have a great one.